This is B of C Live, the video and podcast series of Business of Cannabis. Find out all that we do at businessofcannabis.com. Coming up on B of C Live, we connect with Denis Gertler of CannDelta. We want to connect with him about all things New Jersey legalization, from local control to social equity to types of licenses to timelines. This is Denis Gertler from CannDelta. Denis, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Jay.
I'm glad we got you because I know what we're talking about today, but we've been following obviously closely Business of Cannabis, what's happening south of the Canadian-American border, but specifically in the tri-state area, New Jersey, New York, and Connecticut, because we were in New York over the summer. Some of your team was there as well. Talk a little bit about sort of what we're going to be focused on today, and maybe a little bit about the why, because I'm quite keen on this state.
Yeah, so today, Jay, I'm going to talk about New Jersey and provide a bit of an update on their legalization. And I'm going to acquaint people with some of the top line information they may or may not be familiar with, but also talk about the local scene a bit more than is customary.
Good, because I think that's really important, and there's some key differences between, well, just how the US and Canada operate differently as from a federal level all the way down to a municipal level. But just a note, in I think it was June of 2018, me and John Prentice from the Canadian side went down to New Jersey to Trenton to hear sort of how quickly they were legalizing. Now it's 2021 in November, and we're still having this conversation, which may tell you a lot about New Jersey, I think.
Yeah, well, we'll get into it. And, some of this stuff is not visible to people if you're not in government, but I have a couple of theories and a bit of information, so we'll talk.
Let's get to it.
Okay, well, first of all, just to familiarize people with a bit of background. So on February 22nd of this year, the CREAM Act, or the Cannabis Regulatory Enforcement Assistance, I think, and Marketplace Modernization Act, say that 5 times fast.
That is not a good acronym.
I keep thinking of crema in my espresso whenever that
or cream the band. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that could be. Anyway, they signed 3 bills legalizing recreational cannabis in the state. And some key features is that adults may purchase and possess up to an ounce, or 28.35 grams for Canadians, or equivalent of dried flower. They set up a cannabis regulatory commission to regulate the industry. They specified 6 license classes, which are very similar to licenses that you could get in Canada, although there's a wholesaler license, I think, which is particular to that state.
I'd like to get that one here.
Yeah, well, that may be another episode.
Yeah.
I think things are changing, but anyway, I don't want to digress. You have to, if you want to be a distributor or a delivery service, you also need to be licensed on a state level. Unlike Canada, and you flagged some differences, several of the US states, and I think New Jersey particularly, have a number of social equity provisions that I'll get into a bit later. One of the big key ones, of course, is expungement of records. And I think already there's something like 362,000 criminal records that could be expunged. There's a provision for cannabis consumption areas, which are only in licensed retail and medical dispensaries. They can't be standalone. Medical dispensaries can apply to sell recreational cannabis, but they will need a local endorsement. We'll get into that a bit. And municipalities have a very fundamental role in the state. Now, some timelines to keep in mind. I had to be a bit creative, Jay, in putting these together because they don't make it easy for you. You won't find this on the CRC's website. But obviously, the date for legalization is important. On August 19th, the CRC approved what they call their initial rules, which are essentially 169 pages or 159 pages of regulations that really explain, how the whole process is going to work. On August 21st, the opt-out deadline for municipalities kicked in other words, municipalities until then had the option of banning all cannabis businesses or selectively certain cannabis businesses. Well, for the next 5 years, they can't do that anymore, although they can opt back into the framework if they'd like. On September 18th, the CRC was supposed to start accepting license applications. We have information that they missed their own deadline, and I haven't been able to get clear information about whether they have started accepting and processing. I think they have, but there's, again, no public indication of that. On February 22nd, the deadline to approve up to 37 cultivation licenses occurred. And what that's about is that for a limited time, they put a cap. I don't know why 37. There must have been a formula based on what they thought was market demand for cultivators. Now, interestingly, that does not include cannabis micro business cultivators. And we'll talk a bit about that. They come under the heading of social equity. And as many of those could be licensed as apply, potentially. On February 26th, the CRC was to set, for 2022, that's next year, the CRC is to set a date within 180 days of new rules for recreational sales. So we'll watch that very closely. On February 22nd, a year later, on 2023, license holders may fulfill license limits set for different classes. So in other words, depending on what class of license you hold, you're restricted to certain other types of licenses. And it works pretty similarly in Canada, but there are different combinations in New Jersey. So for example, let's think of an example. I have a footnote here. A license holder and its owners and principals may concurrently hold a cultivator, manufacturer, retailer, plus cannabis delivery service license, but no other types of license. Now, they don't have to have all of those licenses, but that's the universe that they can select from. And then finally, on August 20, 2026, the 5-year moratorium on municipal opt-out concludes. One of the really important things to realize with this legislation is that safety does matter. Adults are 21 years and over in New Jersey, but similar to Canada, there are product packaging rules for child-proof containers, warning and risk assessments. There's a hotline number to poison control centers and other information that must be on all the labels, including direct information and data on THC and CBD levels, but also a scheme that would flag low, medium, or high levels for a cursory at a glance view by consumers. Unlike here, cannabis products cannot resemble food. So no brownies or cookies, I guess, unless you're making them yourself.
Right.
No cartoon, and that, by the way, the legislation doesn't say anything about that, but you're not allowed to grow cannabis. So I guess theoretically you couldn't make your own brownies or cookies, although you could buy it. So I'm talking myself out of that already. As far as advertising and promotion go, there's no cartoon characters. You can't show it as candy or food, and you can't depict any images that could attract children. So that's very similar to here. Vapes, you recall there was a bit of a vape crisis in relation to nicotine in the US not so long ago. So no known or potentially harmful ingredients for vapes. And also similar to here in many provinces, you can't smoke or vape, or I always have trouble pronouncing this word, aerolicize, where
right.
wherever smoking and e-cigarettes are banned.
Right.
Now, I mentioned social equity earlier. It's a key driver. It's something that's largely absent from Canadian legislation, but In New Jersey, Black Americans are almost 4 times more likely to be charged, or have been until now, with marijuana or hashish offenses. And I think the actual number is 3.77 times more likely. And that's over quite a long period of time. And actually, I listened to an interview of Diana Waynu, who's the chair of the commission, and she made a distinction between marijuana and cannabis. So marijuana is the term that applied to the illicit market, or still applies to the illicit market and pre-legalization substance. As soon as it becomes legal, it's termed cannabis, which is something I did not know before.
Tell horticulturists that.
What can I say? But the other thing that's interesting is that there are 3 types of social equity businesses: the social equity business itself, diversely owned, which applies to women, minorities, and disabled veterans, and impact zone businesses, which I'll describe a little bit further on here. Also micro businesses, which could apply to all 3 of those different types, and conditional licenses, which are meant to be a bridge to a regular annual license, but giving you a little more runway and time to get all your ducks in a row. I mentioned expungement already. Lower, in some cases, very low license fees for priority applicants. So if you come from some of these priority social equity groups, fees start at $100 and go up, of course, from there, but they're typically about 50% of what a regular cannabis applicant would have to spend. There's another nice feature in that only 20% down, it seems very American to me, is upon initiating your application. And then once you're awarded a license, you pay the remainder of the fee. And there are also some measures to control large businesses, or what they call multi-state operators, recalling that in the US, it's very balkanized. Legalization is on a state-by-state basis. And so there are some operators who are active in a number of states, but New Jersey wants to bias the system in favor of locally based and usually equity-driven businesses. There'll be an equity excise tax, which will be used to fund education, economic development, and social services. So that, again, is a specific feature of New Jersey's legislation. So small business is favored in New Jersey. There are size and operational limits. For a micro business, it's up to 2,500 square feet of total operating space. It must be owned by people with a minimum of 2 years residency in the state. They have a very complex bonus evaluation system, which there's been a lot online about this. I don't think anybody fully understands it, including the commission. Probably it'll come out in the wash as they try to figure out who has priority. But for example, if your principal owners have 5 years of residency, that gives them extra points. So if you're ranking, to see who gets a license or how quickly they get a license, the bonusing system will be important. A micro business also employs up to 10 people, and no significant person in the operation with decision-making or financial interest can own another cannabis business, even another micro business. About a quarter of all state cannabis licenses are reserved for micro businesses, and actually 10% of each license class are set aside, a minimum of 10%, that is, for cannabis micro businesses. I've already mentioned their accessibility for the conditional license. They're not subject to the cultivator license cap. And again, the provisions to rein in larger businesses were largely to benefit local smaller businesses. So here's what I really want to stress in this presentation, Jay, local businesses have a lot of power in New Jersey. And this is a quote directly from Diana Wainu, that local governments really have the reins here. I think that's explicitly by design. And it's really interesting because cannabis is popular in New Jersey as a legal product. There was a ballot question, which is actually an amendment to the New Jersey Constitution, and it passed overwhelmingly. I think there's a 2/3 majority statewide, but I think that where it passed, there weren't many municipalities where it passed with less than 60% support, and some that passed with 75% support, the two largest cities, Newark and Jersey City. So, huge support statewide, but when it comes to my actual town or municipality or county, 70% of the municipalities prohibit cannabis businesses at present.
At present being the ultimate point.
Yeah, I mean, there is a 5-year moratorium, don't forget, but they could opt in. Some of those could opt in. And what I'm hearing is that there are a whole range of reasons why municipalities opted out initially. Some of them are that they really didn't like the idea of having a cannabis store or not just store, could be or what they call dispensaries down there. Could be a cultivator or what they call manufacturing, which we would call an LP up here, or a processor. So there are those. Lakeview County stands to mind as one that was very anti-cannabis, voted to keep them out by a 2/3 majority. So on the flip side of what the state trend was. But there's support, despite there being support in both Republican and Democrat leaning or dominant counties and municipalities. Some of them simply thought, well, let's adopt a wait and see attitude, see how it goes. Others may be intending to permit these businesses, but needed more time to get their ducks in a row.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I just feel like there's a couple things. One, we've seen this cycle before in Colorado, California, cities who say no, and then eventually say yes because the sky doesn't fall during legalization. That's on the one hand. On the other, it's not as if New Jersey is an island legalizing. Like, there's going to be intense competition, especially in Newark and Jersey City, right outside of New York City, that, the places that are adjacent to New York, there's going to be tremendous pressure for these cities to not have their residents cross state lines to go buy cannabis and bring it back, because why give away that tax dollar? So all these, I understand the politics of it. I just think the tax implications of it and the sort of foot traffic implications become very clear very soon.
Well, indeed, actually, a lot of observers have mentioned that New Jersey is a bit of a pivotal state because it's surrounded by a number of populous states that are going to experience increased pressure to, hurry up their legalization efforts as a result of New Jersey's.
Yeah.
So basically saying what you just did.
Yeah.
Now, municipal approval is required for alternative treatment center expansions, or otherwise known as ATCs. Most people will see them as medical dispensaries, but they could be medical growers and manufacturers as well. So it's a bi-level requirement. The state has to license, and then there needs to be what's called a municipal endorsement. And so without that endorsement, you can't start selling recreational cannabis. Or let's say open a consumption area adjacent to your store. So municipal approval is really important. Local governments can also specify the numbers and types of businesses, restrict their hours of operation, create their own licensing regime. And we've heard through the grapevine that Newark is doing this. That we have a couple of clients down there, and Newark has opened up their licensing process right now. They can
a lot of different layers of government.
No kidding. So people think Canada is bureaucratic, right? We don't have a monopoly on that.
Right.
We can also, it's maybe not as much a part of the mythology in the US, but it's very much a reality. Also, municipalities can lever a 2% up to 2% transfer tax and convey their licensure preferences to the CRC, who I think would take them quite seriously. And so business is local. 50% of micro business owners have to live where the business operates. And that has to be, that means 50%, meaning, I think, guess it's really 51% of the ownership structure, has to be local. Social equity pathways emphasize local. And although there are 3 types, they're kind of like Venn diagrams, because you could actually quite easily inhabit all 3 categories. So a social equity business, essentially a majority ownership by a person from an economically disadvantaged area, that would be defined, I think, as 80% of the average mean income of New Jersey, something like 150% or at least 150% of, what's the statistic I'm looking for here? I think of the insurance rates, or the health and uninsured rate. That's what I'm looking for, and poverty rate. So, so they have specific statistics on these that come into play that would define you as a social equity business. Impact zones, typically larger communities. I believe it's a population of 120,000 and above, with higher arrest rates for marijuana and hashish in the past, and high unemployment and poverty rates, as I've just described them. Interestingly, and there may be a competition for become an impact zone, because they have to be defined by the state. So 70% of the sales tax proceeds will go to these areas. So that's, in other words, the taxes that are raised from the sale or the transfer of cannabis from cultivators, through the supply chain, will go to these areas, and that's designed to benefit these areas both socially and economically through a number of measures. It could be grant programs and other means of bonusing these municipalities, or I believe it'll be done on a zip code basis.
Okay.
Municipalities may also create their own complementary social equity programs. So you could have a kind of layering effect there. So I think you're beginning to see that it's one thing to respect all the state level rules, and quite another to be able to gain the endorsement and the support of local residents and local governments.
It's challenging. I mean, it's challenging because you can imagine your municipality could say, yes, we're welcoming cannabis businesses in there, but then have enormous amount of power about where and how they operate within even that framework.
Totally. And if you're not plugged into the local scene, you're just not going to operate. You're not going to get a license to open a business. And then, once you have a license, that's not the end of it. You have to continue to get along with your neighbors and be seen as a good local business for the area. So I think that's where there could be some stumbles. We have experience at CannDelta working at that level, helping companies structure their ownership groups, their messaging, their lobbying efforts, helping them run compliant businesses, ensuring that they're setting up, as socially responsible businesses. So people see dollar signs, I think, at the front end, but there's a lot of work throughout the process and at the back end to not just meet the letter, but the spirit of all these regulations and laws.
And a good deal of both patience and operational skill to get it, like a strange combination, because patience, certainly because it has been taking lots of time, but also the ability to sort of not go with the flow, but understand that your best laid plans may change, both because regulations are changing, business circumstances change. All of these things are going to be difficult in New Jersey, of course, as you've laid out, but just as difficult in New York, just as difficult in Connecticut and Massachusetts, like it is this times as many legal states as there are, have this layer of complexity to them, which is why folks like you that keep tabs on all of these things is absolutely critical.
And we know, Jay, we haven't even talked about the problem of cash management and getting financing. Many of these businesses are going to have cash machines for retail anyway, because it's still hard getting banking services in the U.S.
It's really hard. Really,
there are no provisions at the moment, by no public or government provisions for, let's say, setting up a government-run savings and loan entity that could support these businesses or give them just the basic cash management and banking services. That's going to be tough.
It is. Denny, I really appreciate it because I think it's instructive to look at like New Jersey as itself, but it's also it's good to think about this state as a microcosm of what is happening in the states, and that you can hear New York is legalizing, but then the layers of that it's sort of within that all the way down to municipalities is really it's helpful to have a team going in it with you.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah, and it also makes it seem like in Canada, while it's super challenging, you're like, well, at least you do have to deal with municipalities, but in Ontario, if it's zoned the right way, the municipality, and this is what the conversation is right now, is can the cities actually have more power?
Night and day. And so I see criticisms of Ontario's system. I go, well, you might want to look south. I could say west as well, but let's just stay on topic here. It's a lot more complicated.
Yeah, it is. Well, Denny, I appreciate it. It's always good to start the week with talking about something interesting, getting expert feedback from the folks at CannDelta. And as always, thanks for all you guys do.
It's really fun having these chats with you, Jay. I hope we can do it again soon.
I think we will. Thanks, Denny.
You bet. Take care.
That was Denis Gertler from CannDelta talking New Jersey. If you like this program, please rate and review us wherever you heard the show. It helps support the work we do. We're able to do what we do because of ongoing partnerships with Alterna Savings, Cannabis at Work, Cannabis Benchmarks, CannDelta, Gallagher, Headset, and Torque & Main. Find out all that we do at businessofcannabis.com.